development is all around with growing hunger and displacement, shattered infrastructure, systems stretched to the limit, all aggravated by climate chaos, not of your making. And indeed, close quote, indeed, the impact of climate change on the continent in Africa is dire. Africa stands out disproportionately as the most vulnerable region in the world. A point confirmed earlier by Lord Charles Bruce in his intervention. Increasing temperature and sea levels, changing precipitation patterns, and more extreme weather are threatening human health and safety, food and water security, and socio-economic development in Africa, according to the State of Climate in Africa report. The impact of global warming is costing African nations up to 5% of their economic output. Climate change is responsible for the protracted droughts and catastrophic floodings across the continent that has hit food production, driving up commodity prices and worsening hunger. According to the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN, around 65% of productive land in Africa, 45% of the continent's total area, is currently degraded, affecting more than 400 million people. These statistics are alarming, considering that the population of sub-Saharan Africa is set to double by 2050, placing a further strain on the region. Given the magnitude of the challenge not only facing Africa and Asia, but indeed the world, this gathering is correctly, in my view, seeking to foster a cooperative and collaborative engagement and dialogue between the South and the North. For indeed, climate change is a global challenge. We need global solutions to this challenge. And I'll elaborate 10, which I think should be a key focus in this regard. Multilateralism and solidarity is central to global climate action. The principle of common but differentiated responsibility must be upheld, because, as previous speakers said earlier, the cause of this challenge historically lies with the North. And so the South cannot be expected to contribute in the same manner. And so we need more effort from the North. We also need to avoid unilateral, coercive, and trade distorting approaches, such as the carbon adjustment measures that are having or will have significant impacts on the Asian and African economies. Vulnerable regions need to build adaptive capacity, foster resilience, and address loss and damage. We need a clear roadmap to deliver the Glasgow decision to double adaptation financing by 2050. You know, this issue of financing has been a conundrum. Previously, there was a commitment of having 100 billion annually. That money was never forthcoming. In fact, we have very little, or saw very little of that. It is very surprising that of late, millions, if not billions, of dollars could be marshaled towards war efforts. And so I think we have to look at climate change as a war, requiring funding from those. And so we are not impressed by those who claim there is no funds. If there's political will, that funding will come. So we need a predictable, appropriate, at-scale funding stream and technological support, because I think that is one of the major drivers that will assist us in overcoming this challenge. There must be support for our right to development, international equity, and a just and inclusive transition. The multilateral development banks need to reform to meet the needs of developing economies for sustainable development and climate resilience. You know, this debt restructuring is another major issue that is impacting on the ability of African and Asian countries to fund climate transitions. Because we are paying significant interest, higher interest, because of the risk that they associate with our debt. And so monies that could have been available for the funding of these important transition mechanisms are not available, because Africa and other countries are paying significant percentage of their revenue to these multinational banks and development banks. So we need to look at that a bit more closer. Africa, according to some sources, require 2.8 trillion by 2030 to implement their NDCs. The scale of climate change adaptation and mitigation financing gap is therefore significant. We also, as the South, as developing countries, as Asia and Africa, we do have solutions. We even have technology available, developed by our own. So it's not a one-way stream where we only need from the North. We also can, through South-South cooperation, share. I mean, one of the sponsors of this conference is a significant player also in the area of renewables. So it's not as if we are waiting here to receive, and therefore this dialogue is important so that we rally all the resources and collaboratively seek to address this challenge. And so the Executive Secretary on Climate, UNFCCC, Simon Steele, stated thus, he says, Africa must be an integral part of the solution to the global crisis we face. Africa's vast potential to drive forward climate solutions is being dwarfed by an epidemic of underinvestment. And so, to the point of previous speakers, we need significant investment from the North, but also from South countries to address this issue. Turning to my own country, we are at the beginning of our transition journey, with much still to be done in terms of formulation policies and actions. Achieving a just transition is at the heart and core of our climate action, with workers and communities empowered to define the transition towards low emissions and climate resilient development. The international pledges to South Africa's just energy transition now stands at $11.6 billion, and much more is required. And so I think there is an opportunity for further investment by our international partners. Institutional capacity building is required. Technology transfer must happen, and we must ensure that the transitions we make is just in terms of employment, is just in terms of the importance of women, making sure that they are not left out of these decisions. So we require investment, and investment in scale. The task ahead of us is daunting, but collectively, with the political will of both the North and the South, with investment, with the technological advancement at our disposal, we can address this challenge. And we have no choice. It is in our interest. Our survival depends on it. Thank you so much, and I wish you the very best with the rest of the conference.
Your Excellency, just clarification, if I may ask. Of course, you know the discussions on who bears the loss and damage. So there is a section which says that the big economies of the developing world should also bear the cost of transitioning from fossil fuel and various other things. That means the two big Asian giants. So what is the view of Africa? And secondly, the fund which is being created, it will be under the World Bank. So do you feel that it's just the same structure which will also again, without being reformed, again, perpetuate the injustices?
No, thank you for the question. As a non-expert, this is my take on it. If the historical cause of the climate challenge is in the north, then certainly the north bears a greater responsibility. That is the very principle of CBDR, common but differentiated responsibility. And therefore the funding must also, to a greater extent, come from the north. I live in a region where a country is the second biggest city in Mozambique was completely wiped out, the infrastructure, by climate change. My own city, Cape Town, almost went dry, completely dry. Now, if the argument is that we are not the main cause of this, others are and have that responsibility, then it is a question of justice that they should bear that cost. On the location of the fund, it's a decision made already, where the money will be. So there's very little one can do in terms of changing a global decision. We own it at the end of the day. So I'm not going to question the location of where that fund is. We are all members of the World Bank, and while saying that, this World Bank and IMF also needs reform. And so I can understand the challenge that we entrust organizations that requires reforms with important key responsibilities, whether it's the Security Council, whether it is the World Bank or IMF. They have not kept up with global developments. They are untransformed, and that is part of the challenge. Perhaps we must reform these institutions, but we cannot wait for them to reform and not have the mechanism in place. So that would be my take on it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.